Hello everybody, and welcome to another video. My name is Jack, and today I'm going to be ranking all 14 Fox X-Men movies from the worst to the best. If you're new to the channel, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications, and join me down below in the comment section to share your ranking of the 14 X-Men movies. This is all just a personal list, my personal take, my opinion, and I would love to see what you have to say about this subject matter. So with the recent release of Deadpool and Wolverine, the Fox X-Men franchise has been brought back from the dead, and this is a franchise that I really enjoy despite all its misses. And the last time I ranked a superhero franchise, I did the Spider-Man movies, and I had a lot of fun making that video. So I figured this new Deadpool movie coming out was a great opportunity to rank all the X-Men movies, so this is a video I'm just really excited to jump right into. This list will not include any of the other Fox Marvel movies such as Daredevil, Elektra, or any of the Fantastic Four films, nor will this include any alternate takes of the various X-Men movies, such as Once Upon a Deadpool or Days of Future Past: The Rogue Cut. This is just the theatrically released X-Men, Deadpool, and Wolverine movies with the weird extra one people often forget about, and this is in ascending order, so I'm starting off with the worst film at number 14 and working my way up to the best film with number 1. With all that out of the way, let's get into the ranking.
Did you just call me Blob?
I don't know if there's a more uninspired movie than X-Men Origins Wolverine. This is the result of a bunch of producers throwing money at this big explosive project to make the most cheesy, painfully 2000s, virtually unwatchable movie possible, and they succeeded. This is the epitome of Fox Marvel's badness. Complete, dull stupidity, virtually devoid of any artistic expression. I honestly don't think there's anything good about this movie. The only thing close to redeeming qualities are Hugh Jackman's badass mutton chops and Ryan Reynolds' funny improv lines that show how ready he really was to play the Deadpool character, even if the entire movie around him totally sucked. And it's on that note that this movie gives a whole new definition to the term unwatchable. You could take literally any scene, frame, or line of dialogue from this movie and make a meme out of it. The CGI is dreadful, every shot of the claws look cartoony as all hell, and so much of this movie feels like PS2 graphics. The cinematography is just horrendous to look at, and the action sequences here, despite being entertaining, feel beyond dated. And despite the fact that this movie is 15 years old, it still feels dated for the time it came out. This came out in 2009, which was after Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. It was after The Dark Knight. The MCU was even existing at this point, so there was really no reason for Fox to be making Marvel movies like it's the late 90s. There's no main point or story trying to be told here. The central plot is paced like an 8-year-old telling you about their over-convoluted, made-up dream, bridging parts of the narrative by saying, and then, and then, and then. And arguably the most important part of this movie, Wolverine getting the adamantium inside of him, is extremely rushed through and not developed at all. It means significantly more when it's referenced in other X-Men movies such as X2, Logan, and Days of Future Past than it does in the movie we actually see it happen in. There are so many outlandish ideas tackled here, but none of them are really leaned into enough to fully mean anything positively or negatively. And there are tons and tons of tonal imbalances. Like, you'll have these really dark, gritty, and heavy scenes followed by absurdly cartoonish, goofy crap. The worst example of this being where in the middle of Wolverine's big, epic quest for revenge, he goes on a side mission where Will.i.am coaches him in boxing against the Blob, which is one of the most stupid and goofy sequences that I've ever seen in a movie. But the absolute worst thing about this movie is what it does to Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool. I know people often like to bring up how he's the merc with the mouth and he gets his mouth sewn shut, but that's not even the worst thing. They give him claw hands and laser eyes and teleportation powers, and it very much feels like the people making this movie never read a comic book a day in their life. This is not only a disrespect to the rest of its franchise, but it is completely unfaithful to the source material, and it is an embarrassment to the art of filmmaking as a whole. This is studio interference at its finest, and quite possibly the worst comic book movie of all time.
That was so hot.
My entire life, it's been virtually impossible for me to fall asleep at movies. Even if a movie absolutely sucks, I'm still sticking around to the end to see if it gets laughably worse or sometimes even potentially better. The New Mutants, though, made me wish that I could fall asleep at movies because it's so dull and boring on so many levels. It feels more like a TV show than a movie, with a directing style virtually devoid of any style or energy, a script jam-packed with exposition and melodrama, and a mystery the audience solves in the first 15 minutes that it takes the characters the whole entire movie to figure out. There's probably an alternate universe somewhere where this movie is kinda good, and that's why I have it placed above X-Men Origins Wolverine, because it's at least a little bit creatively inspired. Josh Boone, the director, wanted to make something that was like a Breakfast Club type coming-of-age story with isolated horror elements and set in the X-Men universe, but Fox really held back his vision and didn't allow him to fully run in any of these particular directions. So the final result is this movie that isn't scary enough to be good horror, doesn't have enough cool mutant stuff to be a good X-Men movie, and doesn't get you invested enough in the characters to be a great coming-of-age story. And I honestly don't think there's anything particularly good about this film. I guess Anya Taylor-Joy as Magic gets a little cool in the third act when she gets the laser sword and Lockheed becomes a real dragon like in the comics, but that's after her being this blatantly racist, annoying, and unlikable Russian goth girl for the first hour of the movie, and I don't have any emotional connection to the comics version of Lockheed, but it's pretty lame that they made him a freaking puppet. I kind of respect this movie for trying to do something new and different, but it's so poorly executed on so many levels that it might even be one of the worst Marvel Comics adaptations ever made. Even 2015 Fantastic Four was better, because at least that movie had a forward-moving plot that, while still being absolutely terrible, never truly made you bored. For the first two acts of New Mutants, I felt like literally nothing was happening, and the third act is not nearly cool enough to put the story back on track. Now on to forever forgetting that this movie even existed.
Rise again just like the phoenix.
Nothing screams franchise running out of steam more than the mediocre disaster that is Dark Phoenix. It's honestly baffling to me that Fox can take this iconic storyline from the comics, try adapting it to the big screen, and failing miserably twice. But at least The Last Stand is still watchably funny bad. Dark Phoenix is just dull, boring, and has very few redeeming qualities. There are just so many questions to ask with this movie. Where the heck did these stupid aliens come from? How do they know so much about the Phoenix Force, and why are they so boring? How are Quicksilver and Nightcrawler able to breathe in space? Where did Dazzler come from, and why does she sound like a 2010s pop singer when this movie's supposed to be set in the 90s? And how have any of these characters barely aged when it's set 10 years after Apocalypse? Dark Phoenix takes place in the year 1992, which is 8 years before the first X-Men movie. If that's the case, then Professor X and Magneto each have an extremely rough 8 years ahead of them. This movie isn't even a funny and entertaining kind of stupid, it is just lame and dull. It somehow accomplishes the seemingly impossible task of making Quicksilver boring. Like, don't get me wrong, it was absolutely abysmal what WandaVision did to him and completely disappointing on so many levels, but at least there he was still exciting while they were trying to trick us. Dark Phoenix gave us the real Quicksilver, and they made him boring when they had just made him cool in Apocalypse 3 years earlier. I guess there's a few things that don't suck, despite the fact that they obviously don't want to be there. I think the first class actors are still doing the best with the script they're given. I really like the ending scene between Charles and Eric where they're playing chess one more time, and I also like seeing how the two of them and Hank are all devastated by Raven's death. I guess the train fight scene is pretty cool and awesome, and I also like the costumes and how comic accurate they are. They sort of give off an X-Men Blue kind of vibe. But at the end of the day, Dark Phoenix is an extremely messy movie that makes me feel absolutely nothing at all, so that's why it sits here in the bottom 3.
I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!
X-Men The Last Stand is dumb, and there is no other way to describe it. But at least I remember this movie exists. Everything lower on this list could absolutely evaporate from existence, and I would not be affected by it whatsoever, and I probably wouldn't notice. While The Last Stand is bad, it's at least memorably bad, and kind of fun to watch in a so bad it's good kind of way. The final battle with everybody jumping around on wires is so goofy and stupid that I laugh out loud just by thinking about it, and there's some surprisingly cool moments in there. The Juggernaut chase is just iconic, and Logan having to kill Jean is tragic, and I like the way we see him deal with this trauma in The Wolverine. But it kinda sucks, because the first two X-Men movies really set the stage for a pretty solid trilogy, but this third one really didn't stick the landing, and time again, this X-Men franchise would fall apart and have to restart, and this was the first time that the world really saw that these movies could kind of stink.
Welcome to the apocalypse, Mr. Squidward. I hope you like leather.
X-Men Apocalypse is a very long and messy movie. Apocalypse himself as a villain is still one of the worst antagonists in the history of comic book movies. He's played by Oscar Isaac, who's an amazing actor, but when you cover him in blue makeup and give his character no personality in the script, of course it's going to be a lame performance. These last two mainline X-Men movies were so obviously corrupted by studio interference, and the villains were the ones who suffered the most from it. And Apocalypse especially sucks when you compare him to MCU Thanos. But as many things there are that straight up suck about this movie, there's probably just as many things that absolutely rock. This uses Quicksilver as an actual character better than any of the other X-Men movies. While he's extremely cool in Days of Future Past, he's just this cool side character who comes in for a little bit to serve a minimal but memorable purpose in the story. But in Apocalypse, he's actually a crucial part of the team. His skills save the rest of the X-Men time and time again, and in the final battle, he's crucial to stopping Apocalypse. And he gets fleshed out more as the character, with the whole inner conflict surrounding him knowing Magneto is his father. And speaking of Magneto, he's totally awesome in this movie. Michael Fassbender, as usual, knocks it out of the park with this performance as this tragic character, and the scene with his family is just brutal. I also love the Hugh Jackman cameo as Weapon X. That whole sequence is definitely an awesome plot point. So I mean, while there is a bunch of stuff that is awesome about this movie, there's a lot of it that's just straight up bad, so it kind of balances out towards being a little low on this list.
Japan!
The Wolverine is a very interesting X-Men film because I've always thought that it isn't as cool as it should be. It's a Wolverine solo movie from legendary director James Mangold. It adapts a classic comic arc where he goes to Japan and fights Silver Samurai, and so it's a pretty safe bet for a standalone movie that kicks a lot of ass. But as the X-Men franchise often does, it takes a really cool thing that should work on paper and somehow manages to make it forgettable and underwhelming. There's some cool fight choreography for sure, but it's really held back by the PG-13 rating, so you can't really show Claws stabbing people, and they have to do that off screen or put a door in between them. And so there's kind of no real reason to watch this one, an R-rated Wolverine movie like Logan exists and gives us all the action that we really want. Speaking of Logan, I think all the best qualities of this movie is how it's kind of a prototype for what Hugh Jackman and James Mangold were able to build later on. And there's some really cool elements of this movie that pay off later in Logan. Like when that one chick who can see the future has a vision where Logan dies and she tells him that he'll die holding his heart in his hands. And in Logan, where Logan actually dies, instead of holding his literal heart, he's holding the hand of his daughter. So there's little cool things like that where you see like the skeletons and the bare bones of the cinematic masterpiece that would come 4 years later. But then there's also a lot of weird, cheesy studio interference stuff. Silver Samurai is just such a badass villain in all other X-Men media, and this movie makes him a lame, CGI, unexciting monster robot. So while you can do a lot worse than the Wolverine, this is very much a movie that I will forget it exists entirely unless I'm having a conversation with somebody about the X-Men movies, and this one just manages to come up.
We stole the Statue of Liberty!
X-Men 2000, the movie that started this franchise that's lasted for 2+ decades, the first Marvel movie to be a full-on blockbuster, and Hugh Jackman's first time in this iconic role that he's been stuck playing for 24 years. And this movie is simply okay? Like, this was a great movie for its time, and there's elements of it that still hold up. Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, you could tell from the beginning that this was arguably the best superhero performance of all time, and I think him and Rogue are great vessels for the audience to explore this world of mutants and superheroes for the first time. Not to mention the amazing rivalry between Magneto and Professor X, with great acting from Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen, but at the same time, there's elements of this movie that feel extremely dated. This is kind of a butchered, one-note version of Cyclops. No shade towards James Marsden, I just don't think this is a very good performance from him because his only character trait is guy who's dating the girl Logan wants to get with, and he's so much more than that in the comics and cartoons. And it's on this note that this movie is kind of devoid of any charm or comic accuracy. The X-Men in the comics have bright, vibrant costumes that are just so much fun to watch in action, but that's completely ruined by this movie just giving them these cheesy, dated black leather costumes with no life or personality to them. Comic books were literally banned on set, so Kevin Feige had to sneak some in so the actors could actually understand their characters. So while this is an influential movie for its time, being a comic book film that didn't totally suck, it still feels like it's of another era. And it really makes you appreciate how much Sam Raimi and Christopher Nolan did for comic book movies. I can imagine this being a big deal in 2000, but after 24 years of bigger, better, cooler comic book movies, this one doesn't hold up all too well.
We're doing a sequel.
X2 is a step up over the first film in pretty much every way. I do think it gets a little bit overhyped when people consider it one of the greatest comic book movies of all time. I personally don't know about that, but I still think this movie is fantastic. There's action sequences from this film that are permanently burned into my brain. The opening set piece with Nightcrawler trying to kill the president is an awesome way to kick off a movie. Magneto breaking out of the plastic prison is awesome. The scene where Stryker's soldiers raid the Xavier Institute is really cool. And the Wolverine fight with Lady Deathstrike, who has the claws coming out of her fingertips, is absolutely bonkers. But underneath all of this is a great story that uses the X-Men premise to the best of its ability. If The Last Stand was the first movie that showed how low the lows of this franchise could be, X2 was the first one to showcase how much potential this concept had. You've got that great triangle dynamic between Xavier and the X-Men, who are mutants that want to coexist with humans, Magneto and the Brotherhood, who hate humans, and then Stryker's humans, who want to eradicate mutants. And it's on that note that Stryker is a truly hateable and sadistic villain, and his son being a mutant provides a lot of unique complexity to the story. X2 is just an awesome movie, and it's the awesomeness of films like this that paved the way for greater comic book movies to come in the future.
I'm touching myself tonight.
So many of the X-Men movies have most of the creative inspiration behind them absolutely obliterated and smothered in studio interference, but the Deadpool films are some of the only movies in this franchise that feel like they fully became the movies that they were meant to be. The first Deadpool movie that kickstarted this trilogy is truly one of the most fresh, distinct, and organic superhero movies out there. You can tell it's made with a lot of passion. Ryan Reynolds put literally everything into getting this movie made, and it's impressive how much him and Tim Miller were able to do with a limited budget. Right off the bat, the Deadpool movies were a solid combination of so many things. Well-choreographed action that kicked a lot of ass, comedy that has you dying with laughter, cool nerdy references to the comics, and great personal stories at the center that make you feel a bunch of rich emotions. You could argue that this has the best story of all of the Deadpool films because it's a very human, emotional, and relatable central character arc. There's this romance at the beginning of the film that's challenged as soon as Wade gets cancer, so he turns to some shady people to take the risk of curing himself. But when he goes from being Ryan Reynolds to totally deformed, he doesn't like the way he is, so he wants revenge. And it's at the end when Vanessa wants to be with him regardless of what he looks like that this movie manages to deliver a heartwarming conclusion to a devastating story, with plenty of great laughs all the way through. There's just a ton to love about this movie. Colossus and Negasonic Teenage Warhead are awesome mutants. Doppender, Weasel, and Blind Owl are all good supporting characters. This has to be one of the best scores Junkie XL has ever produced, and perhaps the craziest Stan Lee cameo in all of Marvel. The only reason it's this low on this list is because I'm not super crazy about origin stories, and the limited budget definitely holds it back from beating some of these bigger spectacle films I have placed higher. But this is still a great, straightforward superhero comedy that was an absolute game changer for R-rated comic book movies.
Time travel!
Back when I was 10, Days of Future Past was one of my favorite movies. I've seen it more times than any other film on this list. I could probably quote a bunch of scenes from it front to back. And there's still parts of it I really like, but upon this most recent rewatch, there were a few issues I had with it. I think Kitty's time travel powers are a little bit outlandish and unexplained, so it doesn't really develop the rules of this plot quite enough. There's some tonal imbalances between the future world and the past world, and Magneto's motivation is a little bit all over the place. But despite all these nitpicks, there is a lot to love here with some great acting all across the board. Hugh Jackman, as always, does a great job as Wolverine. James McAvoy acts the hell out of every scene he's in, and I really love his chemistry with Logan. And Michael Fassbender just rocks as Magneto. But my favorite character in this movie, in the entire X-Men franchise, is Quicksilver, played amazingly by Evan Peters. No shade towards Aaron Taylor Johnson, he's a great actor, but Days of Future Past really sabotaged Age of Ultron. Joss Whedon knew how lame his comic-accurate Quicksilver was, so he had to kill him off with freaking bullets. Fox Quicksilver is a character with so much personality that he feels like a real dude. He's got an awesome man cave and really rad style. It's so cool how cartoonishly fast he is. And if anyone's going to remember only one thing about this entire movie or the young cast X-Men movies as a whole, it's that Quicksilver kitchen scene. The sheer coolness of how fast he's going, the awesome visualization of what super speed would look like somewhat realistically, the goofy ways he takes out security guards, the perfect song choice of Time in a Bottle. This is the best super speed sequence in any movie ever, and it solidified Peter Maximoff as the best speedster to ever run across the silver screen. But throughout this whole movie, there are lots of emotionally rich scenes. The best scene in this movie is where younger Charles comes face to face with his older self, because he sees that amid all this bleak hopelessness he's going to deal with, there's amazing things that he's going to do for so many people that make it all worth it. So while it's no Infinity War, nor is it any Spider-Man 2, Days of Future Past is still a great movie with plenty of emotionally potent moments.
I guess dubstep never dies.
I think I'm in the minority of people who actually prefer the second Deadpool movie over the first film. In the last week or so, it's quickly shooting up to become one of my favorite comic book movies of all time. When you take the creative freedom of the first movie, amp it up on a larger budget, and give it to the co-director of the first John Wick film, then you're gonna end up with a pretty badass movie. And there's tons of great action sequences here that David Leitch knows how to direct the crap out of. Everything is so fast-paced and stylized. He has a great sense of colored lighting like he often does, and it's all just heart-poundingly cool how it complements the soundtrack. This is easily the most comic-accurate movie in this entire franchise. The Juggernaut in this movie is significantly better than Last Stand Juggernaut. Josh Brolin kicks so much ass as Cable, and I love the inclusion of all the X-Force characters. So many jokes in this movie are endlessly quotable. This probably uses fourth wall breaks in the least tension-breaking way out of all the Deadpool movies, and Deadpool basically has a different running gag with every supporting character. I love all the say anything references with Colossus, and the best part is obviously when Wade is sitting on his couch with his baby legs after Juggernaut rips him in half. The story here is really good too. Killing off Vanessa allows Wade to go to this really hopeless place and come back while finding family in an unlikely place, and I love the bond he forms with the mutant version of Ricky Baker from Hunt for the Wilder People. Deadpool 2 is just an awesome movie on so many levels, so it rightfully deserves to be near the top of this list.
How would you like a job where you get to keep your clothes on?
X-Men First Class is a movie that I really changed my opinion on with this most recent rewatch. The first time I saw it when I was like 10, I thought it was weird and horny and didn't have as much cool mutant stuff as some of the other films, and I would honestly go as far to say it was my least favorite of the X-Men movies. But when I rewatched it this past week for the sake of making this video, my thoughts on it completely changed, and now I might even go as far to say it's my favorite ensemble X-Men movie. I love the way it seemingly combines so many ideas into a really unique and distinct superhero film. It's a Professor X and Magneto origin movie that's also about the forming of the superhero team. There's a little bit of historic fiction in there, tying into the early Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis, and taking this concept of mutants and approaching it as a period piece set in the 1960s. It's a great way of making this franchise feel so real. The performances here are all extremely rich, and it's great to see that even this early in the history of mutants, there's all these clashing ideologies and worldviews, so early factions are already forming, even though they have all this mutual respect for one another. Seeing Nicholas Hoult in here made me really excited for him to play Lex Luthor. This might be Jennifer Lawrence's best performance, and though Kevin Bacon is a little weird as Sebastian Shaw, I like the impact he has on Magneto's character. But the obvious standouts of this movie are James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender as Professor X and Magneto. Don't get me wrong, I love Ian McKellen, but Michael Fassbender was definitely a lot more intimidating in the role of Magneto. He's able to capture that aura of tragedy about his character, and he does plenty of badass Magneto stuff. And James McAvoy does an awesome job at giving us a younger look at Charles. a much more cocky and somewhat naive version of the character than the one we see Patrick Stewart play. But we still witness all his strengths, even from his young age, and it's through the awesomely edited training montage where Charles helps all the other mutants believe in themselves and use their gifts to their full potential that he comes in touch with his calling for the first time. I honestly didn't expect to rank this above Days of Future Past, but I think I like it so much more because of its solid, straightforward story. If you're considering getting into this franchise, I think this is the best movie to start with. It's the earliest thing in the timeline, so you can watch it and enjoy it with no prior knowledge required, and it portrays superheroes in a cool, stylized way that feels both grounded and faithful to the source material at the same time.
You know how long I've been waiting for this? Woo, I'm about to make a name for myself here.
There's really no other way to put it, but Deadpool Wolverine kicks ass. This movie has it all. It's got some of the best fight choreography I've ever seen, needle drops awesome enough to rival Guardians of the Galaxy, cool nerdy references for hardcore fans to understand, awesome cameos that benefit the story, and laugh out loud over-the-top humor that's endlessly quotable. But at the center of all of that is a great story with a lot of heart. It's able to bring back Wolverine in a way that doesn't disrespect Logan. It brings a satisfying conclusion to the Deadpool trilogy and a great climax to Wade's character arc. And Hugh Jackman just absolutely commands the screen with every scene that he's in. I get this movie's still fairly new, so I don't want to spoil too much about it, but I've seen it twice now, and it's my favorite movie of the year. It's a great send-off to the X-Men franchise, giving this legendary series the endgame level climax that it deserved, while still fitting the vibe of the MCU in a unique and exciting way. The 2020s have been a pretty weak decade for superhero movies, and most of the things that come out are mid-sequels with terrible CGI and jokes that don't really land, but every once in a while, a movie will come out that will remind you of why you love this genre in the first place. Movies like Spider-Man No Way Home, The Batman, Guardians 3, or Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. And Deadpool and Wolverine is definitely one of those movies. This is one of the best movie theater experiences of my entire life, but yet, it isn't even number one.
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
While tons of superhero films like Avengers Infinity War or Spider-Man 2 can be absolute masterpieces as superhero films, there's still plenty of comic book movies that transcend their genre to become pure Oscar-caliber works of cinema, such as The Dark Knight or Into the Spider-Verse. However, I don't think there's any comic book movie that fits this sentiment better than James Mangold's cinematic masterpiece, the magnum opus of the X-Men franchise, Logan. For most superhero performances, the obvious way to wrap them up is by having this big, climactic CGI spectacle that makes $1 billion. The obvious example of this being Avengers Endgame or Spider-Man No Way Home. And while there's nothing wrong with that, Logan does something very cool and interesting by flipping this genre expectation on its head. Instead of having this big, epic climax where the entire universe is at stake, it tells this very personal story set in a rather grounded dystopian future about this reluctant hero trying to help this kid have a better life than he did. This is just one of those movies it's impossible to take your eyes off of. The cinematography is stunning, the action is brutal, and the emotional suspense is crazy. But at its core, it's just this character study of a hopeless, broken superhero who finds that there's some things still worth fighting for, and he defends that with all he has left, an extremely heroic act of self-sacrifice. My favorite scene in this movie is where Logan, Laura, and Professor X have dinner with that family of normal strangers, because it's amid this lie of having this family while frantically on the run and then just sitting down to have a meal with some normal people that it's the first time Logan gets to slow down and get a taste for a simple life. There's plenty of other great moments in this movie, such as the kid shaving off part of Logan's beard to make him look like the Wolverine again, supplementally reminding him of the hero he once was, the powerful death scene you have no soul if you aren't emotionally moved by, and the final shot of X-23 turning the cross on his grave into an X. Like, come on, that's not only an amazing way to end a movie, but an entire character's 9-film story arc. This is more than a movie. This is a motion picture. A cinematic masterpiece on par with Inception, Saving Private Ryan, or even Madagascar Escape to Africa. Logan is the absolute epitome of the X-Men franchise and a testament to what great filmmakers can accomplish without any studio interference. And it's one of those movies where I'm extremely grateful that it exists. At the end of the day, Fox X-Men is an extremely mixed bag of a superhero franchise. I feel like they simultaneously have some of the best comic book movies of all time and some of the worst comic book movies of all time. But bottom line is, in a time before the MCU, before Sam Raimi, and before Christopher Nolan, they were the first ones to make these comic book movies that took their source material seriously and became huge blockbusters. And while they did have some issues to iron out and the occasional stinker movie, there's a certain magic to this franchise that's still bringing people into movie theaters 24 years later. I had a ton of fun making this video, so thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more superhero rankings, let me know in the comments. I'm thinking maybe next I could do Batman because he has an equal amount of cinematic masterpieces and cheesy weird stuff. Or maybe I could do the DCEU for an excuse to hype up the original Shazam and rant about how much I hate Wonder Woman 1984. Possibilities are simply endless, but let me know what you'd like to see. Anyways, that's gonna have to wrap it up. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Until next time, YouTube, I will see you on the flip side.